everyone, and thanks for joining us again on the Seafood Matters podcast. Pressing subscribe and sharing with family and friends really does help the series. Joining us today is Mike Warner. Mike, passion for seafood, is now chairman of the Shellfish Association of Great Britain and now leads Key Connections. Hi Mike, good to see you in the show again.
Hello, Jim. It's wonderful to be back on Seafood Matters, and always great to talk to you. So thank you for having me again.
Thank you, that's kind. Thank you. Can you tell our listeners about your past and now up to Key Connections, about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's been quite a journey, really. As you probably are aware, and when I spoke on your podcast for the first time, I started life out very close to a fishing community and crewing for fishermen as a boy, and had my own lobster pots and all that sort of thing that we went through before, and that really sort of put the hook in me, so to speak, if you excuse the expression. And after after sort of growing up in that marine environment and being associated with seafood and all the rest that went with it, I then went off on another path, still in food production, but I had 30 years in agriculture, in farm management and consultancy, and then in my mid-50s sort of returned to what I knew as a boy, which was the love of seafood, a passion for seafood, if you like, and started writing and in researching the industry and writing for pleasure, really, just as something, as I suppose, as a little bit of an epiphany that I had at the time. And I was determined to resurrect that love of seafood, that passion for the fishing industry and its communities that I had growing up. And I made it my mission to go out and really sort of get under the skin of the industry and embed myself in fishing communities, work with them, live with them, and try and get experience of every aspect of the supply chain from net to plate, so I could tell that story in a more sort of authentic and realistic way, but also in a sympathetic way, which set out the reality of the industry and the challenges that they face. And you know what it's like. It's a fascinating sector, or sectors. We all around the UK, everywhere is different. We have these wonderful mixed fisheries. We have so many different gear types and vessel types and landings and markets and ports, and it's a disparate industry, but it's very close knit, as you know. And I thought, if I can gain the trust of the fishing industry, and that they'll allow me to write and to talk on their behalf in a way that consumers can understand, then of course that gives me the tools in my armory to tell that story effectively. And then hopefully at the end of the day, the people you're talking to, consumers, or whether it's seafood, people eating seafood, or whether it's the media, or whether it's government or educationalists, or other industries, when you're talking to them about the realities of seafood production, it can be empowering. And I realised quite early on in the passion for seafood journey that was an effective means of storytelling. Actually reporting from the coalface and cutting through some of the misinformation that's out there, and projecting a viewpoint which was A, realistic and authentic and had got integrity, B, was current and up to date, and C, was sympathetic to the industry itself. So really, from that storytelling, from that writing initially, it then became more of a consultancy business, and I just thought, well, there is an opportunity here to connect consumer to producer through that storytelling platform. And really, this over the last sort of 12 months, we've taken that a stage further with the Key Connections initiative, which we launched at HRC at the Excel Centre earlier this year. And Key Connections really is the culmination of that storytelling, but then combined with a very much more of an educational slant. So workshops where we give an introduction, or I give an introduction to the UK fishing industry, and I can tailor that, really depending on who the client is. Everything is bespoke, but then we accompany that workshop with a port and market visit, and that really that's where you really do the most good, if you like, by getting people into that working environment on a fish quay, on a market, alongside a vessel, aboard a vessel, talking to fishermen, talking to the producer, and getting them to impart their knowledge and experience to chefs, front of house staff, journalists, you name it, anybody who wants to come on these trips. That's where the empowerment lies, and it's really exciting. I mean, we've done 4 or 5 trips this year already, to Newlyn and to Brixham, and we were just doing one yesterday actually on the east coast here in Suffolk and Norfolk for Linda Wood at Community Catch, and that's part of another project that we're working on at the moment with our East Coast fisheries. But everyone is different. Every visit, every market experience is a different experience, and I think I still learn. I'm learning every day. There's always something that I glean from every time I go onto a harbour side or a quayside or a fish market, and that's the beauty of the industry, really.
You've spent years embedded in ports and coastal communities. What encouraging changes have you seen in how people value British seafood today compared to with when you first started?
That's a good question. I mean, I think in terms of seafood consumption, we haven't really progressed that far. As an island nation, who are a nation of non, indigenous seafood consumers, who rely on imports for most of what we do consume. It's a hard sell. It really is, and anybody in the industry will tell you that. It's seafood consumption in the UK has remained fairly static, but I think what the encouraging things that I've seen, certainly in the relatively short time that I've been involved in this, is that I do get the perception that consumers are seeing seafood as less of a commodity. I know there's the 5 main species, which to a degree are commoditized, but I do get the impression that the consumers, they do want to know more about how the seafood is produced. They want to know what sustainability means. Actually, we can come on to that, and they do like making that connection, especially where they have an active interest in the food. Where people are sort of food centric. I think that's where the encouraging signs are. But at the end of the day, it's protein. We're producing wild protein, and people in fickle markets and with the economy the way it is at the moment, and you know what it's like in hospitality, Jim, at the moment. It's a really hard industry to be in, and fish is expensive, and people, if there's any doubt in their mind, they will turn to cheaper protein sources like chicken and agriculturally produced meats. So, but I do think over the time I have seen people being more encouraged to learn more about the provenance of seafood, and that really does sort of spur me on.
Totally get what you're saying, Mike, and it almost gets to the stage where I find it almost puzzling, but quite worrying, because you mentioned there chicken. I just don't even know if I would even put a supermarket chicken near me now. And what you're talking about there is local fresh seafood. It ticks every box in any diet you want that you recommended.
100%, absolutely. And I come back to that sort of that statement that we don't have a seafood eating culture, despite being an island nation or collection of island nations. We don't have that seafood eating culture, which is why we have, for this abundance of seafood, for this myriad of different species that exist around our shores, we have a dominating export market. Because there are other cultures out there, Europe and further abroad, further afield, who really do appreciate the quality and the provenance of what we've got. And yet, we are fixated, if you like, with these commodities that are imported. So, farmed salmon and tuna and cod and haddock and prawns, some of which, of course, we produce very well ourselves. But it's almost, a paradox, really. We have this incredible diversity of seafood right on our doorstep, and yet we don't tap into it. And yet, when we go abroad, and we've said this before, Jim, we'll go abroad on holiday and we'll eat seafood to a heart's content, and not realise that a lot of it's come from the UK anyway. So, yeah, it's an odd situation.
It's so true what you're saying, Mike. And there's a situation I've regular. I'm sure you have found it yourself. Exactly what you're saying. That's what's making me remember about it. Obviously, friends and people I know who know I'm from fishing, seafood industry. They'll say, "Oh, we'll just say for the like of prawns or different fish species," and they'll say, "Oh, we love that, but the but is, oh, they're all trucked to the continent, so we can't get them." And I just say to them, "Look, just be careful. They're trucked to the continent because they value them more and they'll pay more for them."
Absolutely, and that's what we're up against in the UK. But that's not a reason not shout about what we've got. I mean, yes, the major retailers will keep selling the products which sell, and that's really those five main species that we spoke about. But that's not a reason to not shout about what we've got coming into our ports and harbours and beaches around the UK. And compared to when I started this journey, I think our own seafood is a lot more accessible. I mean, you've got a lot of really good online retailers now, even if we don't have the independent fishmongers that we used to. That you can get fish, good quality, exceptional quality, British caught and dayboat fish seasonally delivered to your door from around the UK. So the opportunities are there, but it's just this reticence from the consumer to experiment and to broaden their horizons, I think, in the kitchen. And I come back to Keith Floyd's remarks that he made, as I always do, back in 1984, Floyd on Fish, and he said, when it comes to eating seafood, we've lost the nerve of our grandparents. And I think it is very much a generational thing, but there are some really encouraging signs that youngsters are embracing certain seafood products like they haven't before, and sushi is one of them.
Well, hopefully, because when you mention sushi, any raw fish, it's even better for us,
Of course,
for
it is.
gut health and that.
Very much so, and I think it's the importing of other cultures and their cuisines. That sort of diversity, that cultural mix of foods that didn't probably exist 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, which has added to our diet. It's added diversity, it's added complexity, it's added nutritionally, and of course in ways that in flavors that we haven't experienced before. And I think that's really good. But of course, what it has done is brought a whole range of different foods, and especially fast foods these days. I was talking to Andrew Crook from the National Federation of Fish Fryers
Oh
last
yeah,
week, and I was saying to him, how do we encourage people to go back to that sort of fish and chip history, that sort of heritage and culture that we've established in the UK over the years? How do we sell more to the same customer? How do you, as an industry, diversify and compete with some of those other food offerings that have come into the market in recent years, in terms of not just meat, but vegetarian offerings as well? And, you go to any big city and you've got this plethora of different fast food and restaurant types, which are all competing for the same spend. And I think we've got to look very closely at our own seafood market that exists, and say, well, how can we actually, how can we manipulate it to compete better in that overall, sort of market position with the other variety of foods that are on offer.
and Andrew, answer for you.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
What was that?
I was
Sorry.
no, Andrew had he an answer for you that
Well,
that is an answer for.
sorry, Jimmy, and I misheard you. Yeah. Well, I think they are really being very proactive about it. I mean, obviously a lot of the fish and chip product that we use in the UK is imported, but the imported product that we have, especially from places like Norway, the marketing and the backstory behind that is incredibly good. And I think we can actually, as a domestic industry, we can learn a lot from people like the Norway Seafood Council, who who put an awful lot into telling that story of their product, and that's why it has become so popular in the UK as a fish and chip ingredient, because they've got the provenance, they've got the sustainability, they've got the uniformity, they've got the consistency of supply, the price point, everything else, and of course they do it in a way that really sort of dovetails into that fish and chip industry, if you like. So yes, I mean I think he's as an organisation, they're looking to do exactly that, and try and come up with novel ways of introducing seafood to their existing customers in other ways.
I think the fish and chip industry is still popular in Scotland, still doing well. I know they have got other competing foods even in the fish and chip and competing with seafood. But I did a previous podcast with a gentleman you possibly know, Paul Gilroyd, on the Magpie Cafe.
Yeah, in Whitby.
And I thought it was a brilliant answer he gave me, Mike. I said, how do you feel? Because I've been told that the great thing for them buying frozen at sea from, say, Norway, he says they can make one phone call, and just one call to one number, and they can order any amount they want, or whatever their order is. It's so easy.
Yeah, it's the ease of it, isn't it? Ease of procurement, which is.
And Paul said, well, he says, Jim, he says, I would feel I lost so much, because when I phone a supplier for fish, I says, I want to know what's been landed. I want to know about the industry. So I feel I need to know more. I just don't want to make one call fits all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think a lot of hospitality businesses, not fall into that trap. That's unfair, but it's a watch your price of cod, isn't it? And then you get the stuff sent along. Whereas, and I think the way things are going, people do deserve. And I said this to Andrew the other day. How are you on traceability? And do you work with boats? And they do. And a lot of their not all of them, but a lot of their members are very, very keen on tracing that product right back to the source. It's interesting, when pre-COVID, I was involved with the National Fish and Chip Awards, and when Seafish were running it, and I said to Nikki Hawkins at the time, I said, wouldn't it be lovely if we could introduce a new category, the best use of sustainable British seafood? And she said, well, what a great idea. So we put it to the board, and they thought it was good, and we introduced this category. I think it's only 2019, and the Scottish Whitefish Producers Association and Scottish Seafood Association sponsored it, and I got to judge it, and it was fantastic, because suddenly it was a slightly different emphasis on the regular award categories, if you like. So we were looking at fish and chip shops around the UK who were perhaps using local catch. Where there's some great Cornish hake going on in the west of the country. There was what else? There was down in Somerset. I went to a restaurant down there who I think won in the end, and they'd got some incredible dishes that they weren't just serving with chips, but they were integrating into their fish restaurant menu. And I just thought how great that was, But then COVID came along, and Seafish became not involved with the Fish and Chip Awards. But it'd be nice to resurrect that and have. Because I think, yes, we do have a lot of emphasis on imported high quality fish from Norway, Iceland, Faroes, wherever. But we also have the hake and some incredible plaice and rock eel and skate, which we could try and bring back onto fish and chip menus. And one thing that really gets me, and I don't know if you've ever encountered this, Jim. Probably not, because most of the fish and chips up your way is predominantly haddock, really, isn't it? But you'll stand behind somebody in a fish and chip shop, and they'll just ask for fish and chips, and it does my head in, because that's fine, but what sort of fish? Do you want haddock? Do you want cod? Do you want hake, plaice, coley? And I think that's the problem. We see it, a lot of the consumers or the public in the UK just see it as fish, and that's so sad, because it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Well, I have to disappoint you, Mike, because we had a fish and chip unit beside a restaurant for, a good 15 years. That was on my menu, fish and chips, because the way, but mind you, it was on Scrabster, one of the top harbours in the country in the world for the quality of seafood. So as far as I was concerned, there was nothing devious about that, or that as far as I was concerned, what was best on the day, that's what was on
Well,
my menu.
that's a catch of the day sort of scenario, isn't it?
Yeah,
And that's a whole different matter. And I think if people can tap into a local supply and have it seasonally, and you have a specials board. I mean, there's a great fish and chip shop in Newlyn, Lewis's, which I love to go in, and it's they'll have a daily special. It might be monk fish and chips, it might be John Dory, it might be Gurnard, whiting, whatever. And that's what I love to see. But of course, they're in the right place, aren't they? They're right on the doorstep.
indeed. But to go along with also what you're saying, I could add to what I've already said. I'll never forget, probably to my dying day. I'm I'm in the unit myself at this. It's a kiosk, and at the hatch, and this guy's standing waiting to be served, and he says, "Have you got haddock?" And I just said, "No, but we have the most wonderful." And before I could say "hake," he turned and swiveled in his feet and
And they're gone.
walked. It's gone.
Yeah, well, and that's you see that's half the craft of storytelling, isn't it? We when we had the shop, I just loved it when people came in and asked for a fish. They'd bring their recipe book, their Rick Stein or whatever they'd bring in and say, look, we need some hake this week, and I'd say, well, actually the hake netters, they've been tied up because of the tide, so we're not had the hake supply this week. We've got some incredible pollock, or we've got some wonderful coley from Peterhead, and you give them an alternative, don't you? And that's the for me the joy of it, because you present them with this fish. Next time they come back in, you say, well, how do you get on with that coley or that pollock? And they go, oh, it's amazing. Have you got any more? Well, no,
Yeah.
we've got hake this week. But do you know what I mean? It's I used to love that sort of that turnover of species. I mean, we sold. I buy anything really if it was on the market, and if it's being landed, why wouldn't you sell it? And we've had wrasse and we've had garfish, weaver fish, greater weaver were really popular. We get them up from the guys down in Newlyn from Cornwall Fish Direct. Beautiful fish, day boat fish. Fillet them off and tasted just like Dover sole. That's
Yeah.
what I mean about that diversity. But once you get people interested, once you start telling them all these stories, and you sort of paint a picture in their mind about where this fish has come from and what's happened over the horizon and how it's actually got to the market and what the fishermen have gone through to actually catch it and their challenges. And you can spend a lot of time talking to people like that, and you end up with a bit of a queue in the shop sometimes. But they're interested, and why shouldn't they deserve to know? Because they're paying for this fish, this product, at whatever level. It might be expensive, it might be a nice freshly cooked, freshly boiled lobster, or it might be a turbot steak, or it might just be a handful of sprats or herring. But each product and each customer needs to be treated exactly the same, and the storytelling is part of it, because a little knowledge goes, I think, a long way.
Listening to you, Mike, I think yet again, you've got another cracking name, Key Connections. I always thought the passion for seafoods was just a wonderful name to have. But talking in your connections when you say that, and I think it makes it, would say, you're ideal for that job as well, because what you say, people coming into your shop with a recipe book and wanting a fish to go with this recipe and that. My goodness, what a connection.
It's a fascinating connection, and of course, as we over the years that we had the shop, I mean, people would. I mean, it was all much word of mouth. I mean, obviously we put a lot of what we were doing on Instagram and on social media, but most of it was word of mouth. We were on a sort of a destination site, farm shop. So, we had no walk-in trade. But people would drive a lot of miles. They'd drive, from 30, 40 miles away and come once a week to stock up on fish. And yeah, they might ring ahead, but invariably they'd just be happy to come and see what we'd got on the slab that week, and of course everything was seasonal. And what I purposely didn't do, and again to help make that connection, if you like, is label anything. Never labeled the fish, and people would have to ask what everything was, and that was a great talking point. It was a great starting point.
Another connection that I felt was important for me, with going back to fish and chips and anything in a restaurant as well. One of the things that was really important for me, and it was on every menu from, I was 20 years, just days short of 20 years, we had the restaurant, and a lot of that time, the fish and chip shops. Every menu, Mike, had the name of the boat that landed the fish and where he was fishing, and it was caught. And I thought that was so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a big chalkboard in the shop with exactly the same, and we'd have boat of the week, whether it was Budding Rose from Peterhead or whether it was Kittiwake from Felixstowe Ferry, one of our local boats landing bass. And I'd have a map drawn on that chalkboard of East Anglia and where our local fish was coming from. And we'd have fishermen land to the shop as well. So some of our local boats would rock up, during, service hours, and if they'd been out and they'd got 2 or 3 boxes of bass, they'd bring it right to the shop and they'd talk to the customers. It was great.
Wow.
That was that connection was forged.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You've obviously built a strong relationship across the fleet and supply chain, Mike. From your conversations, what gives you most optimism about the future of the industry?
Yes, I have. I mean, that's been one of my my sort of foremost things to do, really, was to develop those relationships, not just with fishermen, but with processors and suppliers and wholesalers and markets and anybody in any ancillary industries within that fishing industry, because that really sort of built more of a picture for me, actually, with my storytelling, and certainly helps with the sustainability angle. But for the future of the industry, and I suppose what we've got now is an industry which is a little bit more crystallized than it was, a little bit more polarized. We've got a lot of people got out of the industry over the years, and the fishermen you've got left are the ones who are generally doing the job exceptionally well. They are the pioneers, they are the innovators. They have come up with the gear innovation and the changes, and they've worked with industry and they've worked with public bodies, and they are interested in the management and the science, and everything goes into keeping these fisheries sustainable. And what really gives me heart is organisations who are at the forefront of that and who are prepared to go the extra mile in terms of being part of that management structure. I think, I think the fishing industry these days, we have to have an awful lot of regulation and a lot of policy, and it's very, very difficult to interpret that. But I think we're at a point now where fishermen are much more prepared to feed back into that dialogue, with their own data, with their own findings, with their own science, because it's all there. At the end of the day, they are the guys going and girls going to sea on a daily basis, and they are experiencing exactly what that reality of the coalface of the industry actually is and what it's all about. And that's a great standpoint to have, because you can then compare it with the science, and hopefully that will all go into the mix to fine-tune that policy in years to come, so that we end up with a more responsibly fished environment. So that's what's encouraging about it. I think the industry per se has really come on in leaps and bounds.
Good. Mike, if I could just go back a second, I just meant to mention to you when you said it about the Fish and Chip Awards. Actually, the Fishing News, they have the annual Fishing News Awards.
Yeah.
Carrying loads of different categories within the fishing industry. They have now included Fish and Chip of the Year award in that category. And obviously it would be for UK caught. So maybe that's something you could catch up with, that you'd find that interesting.
That's great. Yeah, I mean that's just the sort of thing we're looking for. I think when we when we're importing so much fish, albeit very good quality, we need to have balance, and balance is the one thing for me which underpins sustainability. It's all very well having exceptional areas of the industry which are running smoothly, but everything has to be in harmony and balance if you're going to create that sustainable base. Not just for the environment, but for businesses, and for the sort of social aspect of communities as well. So yeah, I think something like the British Fish and Chip Award would go down really well, because it brings in that sort of domestic angle, isn't it?
That's right. And well, I can give you the editor's contact details and he's very proactive on it.
So is that
And
Martin?
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, you
yeah,
know Martin.
yeah. I know Martin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
good. Excellent. Well, and just going on from what you said earlier and working with the fishermen and them coming in with stuff and talking to people. Well, when for the dinner last year in Aberdeen for the fishing news awards, they were really keen, and Andy Reid was still with them as well.
Yeah.
Before he retired, and they were really keen to try to do something with deep water species, something different and new. And we managed to get tusk on the menu.
Brilliant.
And Mark Lovey of the venture, the BF registered venture,
Yeah.
he caught it, supplied it, and didn't charge them for it, because he thought if they're promoting tusk, well and good. So that's the connections you're talking about there, and they're there.
100%,
They exist.
100%. They do exist, and again, when we had the shop, I mean, I would buy from Will Clark up in Peterhead, and I'd get him to send tusk down. We'd have tusk, wolf, witches. We had all kinds of stuff from Peterhead, but it was I was so determined to try and make that, as you say, make that connection to the boat, to the skipper, and try and get people enthused about it, which generally they were.
Definitely. Mike, your work gives you a good overview of where the knowledge is improving. What areas do you feel chefs and front of house teams are getting better at understanding in recent years?
I think the trouble with a lot of chefs, and I not all chefs by a long chalk, because obviously there are many chefs out there who buy their seafood in whole, and they'll prep it and go through the whole process, and they'll take a real keen interest in where it's come from and the provenance and who supplied it. But generally, I think a lot of chefs don't have time for that. They get a lot of the products will come in virtually ready or semi-prepared, and so there is a knowledge gap there, and I find not just the chefs, but managers and front of house staff, especially for the workshops. I think if you can sit them down, and the introduction to UK fisheries that I do, we go through the sectors. We talk about gear types, vessel types, ports of landing, shellfish, whitefish, oily fish, aquaculture, and just give them a brief insight into each one of those. And we talk about sustainability, what that means, traceability, seasonality. We talk about regulation and enforcement. We talk about quota, fishing licenses, but not in depth, just enough to give them to sort of pique their interest, if you like. And when I'm giving that workshop and when I'm talking about the industry, it's not like death by PowerPoint. What I do is I've got this amazing bank of images of the fishing industry that I've taken over the last sort of 10, 15 years, and putting images up and then explaining what they see in the picture, I think is more value than giving them a load of bullet points, if you know what I mean. Because A, it holds their interest, and B, you can tell a story. You can tell a story by an image of what's going on the landing deck of a hake netter, or what's going on in Peterhead Market, or what's going on on the quayside with a prawn trawler landing, or what's going on down in a little cove with boats coming ashore. And I think snippets like that perhaps that of scenes that people have never seen before or not really knew existed, really sort of does generate interest for them, and it gets them asking questions. And do you know what? No question is too basic. I just take all questions. It's lovely to have a sort of two-way dialogue, and you get people asking you the craziest of things, but that doesn't matter. Why would they know? And it's but once you just generated those little seeds of knowledge, they're then anxious to learn more, and then you can go on to the next stage. I've just started doing some work with the third year students at Westminster Kingsway College in London, and I went and delivered the workshop to them a few weeks ago to a group of the third years, and on the back of that, we're going to deliver a Key Connections visit for them, for about 20 of them, down to Newlyn Harbour next spring. So it's really valuable stuff, and I just wish that I could have the opportunity to go out and do more of it. Because it's rewarding and empowering for them, but it is for me as well, incredibly rewarding.
Definitely, I can totally follow that. And you find it's very enjoyable as well.
Oh, amazing! Yeah, it really enjoyable. Because having been having been to sea, or having been to the quayside or on the market, and I've gained this knowledge or accrued this knowledge, if you like, to be able to take that into a kitchen environment or to a classroom or a lecture room, and be able to reproduce that, if you like, that knowledge in a way which people can be captivated by. It's really enjoyable, yeah, and you get to meet some great people as well. It's yeah, I enjoy I'd like to do more of it.
It's also, when you mentioned the words you mentioned just there about the traceability and things, I always felt, and certainly with my restaurant, I felt there were 5 pillars the whole industry stood on, and that was, well, simplicity, traceability, integrity, seasonality, and sustainability. But
Yeah,
I felt sustainability was an abused more than used, and I strongly feel seasonality, I see, Mike, is a key to sustainability.
very much so, and those are the tenets that I stand by as well, Jim. Absolutely, the same pillars that you've just mentioned, and I totally agree with you. I think sustainability is one of those words. I used to detest it, really, because it was just so broad brush, and used to be people use it in such a sort of glib and misunderstanding way to describe all manner of different aspects of the industry. It has got a true meaning, and I'm just getting to the point where I'm incorporating more talks on sustainability into my workshop now. And for me, sustainability, it isn't just about the fish populations. And as you have alluded to, it brings in seasonality and traceability and simplicity and all those other things. But it's got to be underpinned by the environment, by the commercial, by the socioeconomic, by the governance. That's what underpins the whole sustainability thing. But then what I
Yeah.
like to do now is break that down even further, and talk about regional sustainability or seasonal sustainability or individual sustainability, and take it down to the nth degree, really. So you can look at individual ports, you can look at individual sea areas, you can look at individual species, you can look at individual communities, individual boats, or individual fishermen, and you can pretty much apply the same rules to each. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And again, it just helps you lift the lid on the industry and get people to look under the surface and say, actually, yeah, this guy down there, he's fishing these 2 products at different times of the year for only a few weeks of the year with minimal impact on the environment, but he's sustaining 2 restaurants. He's sustaining that's helping with food tourism. He's also crewing on another boat. So do you know what I mean? And you build up this sort of
Yeah.
network of different angles, which when in balance are actually sustainable. It's all about balance.
Yeah. And when you mention, I totally get what you're saying there, and I agree with what you said. Seasonality, regional is important, and the areas you're in, because there's going to be different fish in season doing your
Yeah.
way than they are at our way. And another way, a thing I found fascinating with that, and it was during a podcast, it was this fishery scientist in Iceland. He's retired now, old school, as I don't like using the term because I'm in that now. That there's the one word used in completely different situations, just what you said a while ago there, Mike. The fisheries scientist in Iceland reckoned that young fisheries scientists, he described it, they need to get off the computers, get out, see, and follow nature and the seasons.
Mm.
Now, I've been doing a demonstration in one of the local colleges here when I had the restaurant, and I'm saying to them, look, it's important for you, eat the seasons.
Yeah.
So it's the same word. And
You're 100% right, Jim. And what you also said there, we might have the same fish species, plaice, for example. They're going to be in better quality in a different time of the year in the northern North Sea than they are in the Channel. Same species. And that's why I always say to people, yes, eat seasonally and eat locally, but actually anywhere in the UK is local. You know, if you're buying fish from the right port at the right time, at the right season, the right quality, it doesn't matter whether it's coming from Lerwick or Fleetwood or Milford Haven or Newlyn or Lowestoft. Do you know what I mean? If it's the right time to have it, then you buy it.
yeah, but you're saying there with the place and your way and that it's not just a new idea that somebody's come up with,
No,
Mike.
no.
I
It's been
could
going on.
we had a term here that I was brought up with when I was a kid, and it worked. It was ongoing before that. My granny used to use it in her era, and up here it was never eat a fish until it's had a drink of the May water.
Yeah, there you go.
Because it was just May was, we used to, the spawning cycle here would be anything from February, March, April at the latest. And then they would start eating again and getting,
And they'd fatten up.
fatten up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we get exactly the same thing on the East Coast here with our Dover sole fishery, and the soles you get in the latter part of the spring are a different beast to the ones that you'll get in September. Once they've had the summer to fatten up, and
Yeah.
and that's what the fishermen, they're the patterns and the cycles that the fishermen follow and have done for generations, since time immemorial. And those patterns. I mean, obviously, things like climate change, water temperature increase, all those variables, spatial competition. You have to factor in all these things, but actually the fish cycles are still there, and they'll continue to be there, as will the fishermen.
Indeed. Going on, education and training, which obviously is the heart of Key Connections. You run training sessions, workshops, and port visits. What's the most rewarding shift you see in people once they've gone through that experience?
I think the most rewarding thing for me is that once people have been through that experience and they've done the workshop, and we've taken them around the port, and we have people come to, like at Newlyn, we'll hire the boardroom or whatever, and we'll have fishermen come to talk to us. We had Matilda from the Young Fishermen's Network come to a recent visit. We've had Alan Dwan come and talk about the hake fishing. Dave Stevens from Crystal Sea has come and talked about trawling. CFPO, and anybody who's sort of allied to the fishing industry within that port. It's nice to get them to come and talk. So the rewarding thing is, once they've sat down and they've been through that whole experience, is that afterwards, when they go home and they think about it, and or they go back to their restaurant or their studio or whatever, they'll think up questions that they haven't asked, and then they'll come back to me. And I always say, look, if you have anything that you want that you haven't found out today, or something you think about after the event that you need an answer to, just email me or phone me or whatever, and I'll be more than happy to answer it. And if I can't answer it, I'll point you in the direction of somebody who can. And for me, that's job done, because it's got them thinking about it. But what I also love is when, and I I take this back to one of the first visits I ever did in 2016, and it wasn't, Key Connections wasn't a thing then. I was just talking to chefs and trying to get them to come to different harbours with me, just to experience what I'd seen. And I took a couple of guys up to Peterhead from a restaurant in London, and the chef, Ed Baines from Randall and Auburn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I never forget. He walked onto the old Peterhead market then, and there's about, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 boxes of fish set out ready for the morning, and you could see his eyes just come out on stalks, and his jaw visibly drop onto the floor, and he was like a kid in a sweet shop. And I honestly, and that made such an impression on me. I thought, I've got to repeat this, because it's so valuable.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, but the upshot of that was, within 2 weeks we'd got Peter Bruce's cod, I think it was, on his specials board in Brewer Street in Soho.
Oh, brilliant. A lovely guy too, Peter.
Cracking! Yeah, Peter's my sort of go-to. If I need a question answered about Northern Shelf cod or the Norwegian sector or what's going on up in that area, then I just WhatsApp Peter, and he comes back to me virtually instantaneously, and I've learned so much from that guy.
He's such a positive thinker, but he's straight and honest as well. He's not trying to put any slant.
No, not at all. And he's been very well. They all have, all those guys up there who I've got to know over the years, and the same in the Southwest. Very supportive of what I do. And I know full well that I can call on them anytime if I have a question, or one of my clients has a question. And of course, in the mix of that, they've become very good friends.
The only thing I would slightly qualify that with is when the names you mentioned, Peter would fall down a bit if it came to comparing him to tell a story like Jimmy Buchan.
Yeah. There's no one can tell a story like Jimmy Buchan.
Nobody.
I'll tell you a story about Jimmy Buchan, though. And it's one of I've had so many experiences. I've worked a lot with Jimmy, as you know, over the years, and I know you know him really, really well. And I've been up and done port visits with Jimmy for groups. And one of the first times I went up there, Jimmy invited me aboard Amity. And
can I stop you there, Mike?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but you told us a story about Jimmy in the last podcast we did. So,
oh, did I?
Yeah, but before you continue with this one, I loved when you imitated Jimmy's Northeast accent. So.
Well, I don't know. I can't remember which story I told you before in the last.
Doesn't matter. The story doesn't matter. I just want to hear your take on his accent.
Well, this is about his accent, and he invited me onto the Amity, and he was having a meeting, I think, with Marine Scotland and one or two others, and they sat around the. They sat around them in the mess room in Amity, and I sat there with them, and I really had no idea what the subject matter was, and you'd got these broad sort of Doric accents competing with each other, and I found it so fascinating. I just put my phone on the table and pressed record on a voice note, and I've still got it. I've got this wonderful conversation, totally. Unintelligible. I can't understand what they're saying, but you've got this broad Brock accent going on, and I thought, wow, this is something else. I could be in Oslo or somewhere. So good, but yeah, Jimmy's. After that, I've been up there many, many times. We've cooked aboard Amity, and yeah, and of course he no longer has Amity, but I've remained very close, and we've bought shellfish off him for the shop, and continue to do so. For different events and that, his langoustines, and work with him on his lobster supplies. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, indeed. When chefs and front of house staff learn more about how seafood is produced, what impact does that have on the choices they make back in their kitchens and restaurants?
Well, yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think once they start to understand things like seasonality and the fact that you can't get the same fish for your menu every 52 weeks of the year, and you have to go to alternatives. Once the penny drops on that, and they actually start looking outside the box and asking their supplier and actually doing a bit of research into it, then they start to, that's where it really starts to make a difference. Because once they're using fish, as you say, which are in season and in good condition, and they're relying on their suppliers to do that job for them. Of course, that gives them a great angle for their consumers, for their customers, doesn't it? They can vary their menu. They can put specials on, daily specials, market specials, and they can do the storytelling themselves. And of course, for the customer, that's empowering. Gives them a more of a rounded experience for their dining, if you like, and gives them better tools in their armory. Pass that knowledge on, gives them better tools in the box when they're making choices. Off a menu, if they know more about the provenance of the fish, they might be more inclined to choose one species over another. So the more you can do, and of course the ultimate is to have your menu sitting on the table with a barcode, not barcode, a QR code, so that the diner, the customer, can just click on that with their phone, and that'll take them straight through to the boat that's landed the fish. And that of course is the ultimate connection.
And when obviously you're encouraging people to ask good questions of suppliers and it. Do you feel that is a help to make them confident, informed buying decisions?
Yeah, I think they do, and that's really where the extra knowledge comes in. If they can come down to a fish market or a port with me and go through that process and learn a little bit more about the fundamentals of seafood production, when they go back and they get on the phone or email to put an order in, their questioning can be more nuanced, can't it? They can go that little bit further. They can ask a little bit more about that product because it comes from a standpoint of knowledge, which they perhaps didn't have before.
And going on then, say, exploring species which you've mentioned and the seasonality issues in that which they have obviously maybe not even considered before, chefs and front of house people. Do you feel that opens doors for them and sparks curiosity?
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, curiosity is, I think, is the one sort of element that we plug into in any of these visits. We try and, as I said before, we try and pique people's interest, and that's through actually being there in the live on the quayside with all the sights and sounds and smells that goes with that, or through imagery and through the narrative, through the storytelling. And I think people are naturally curious, some more than others, but you have to get it out of them, And I think there's obviously I get several people who aren't quite so enthused about the whole prospect of being on a fish market at 6 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, but most people are, because they're there for a reason. And I think the beauty of Key Connections is that we don't just do it for chefs and hospitality. We do it for anybody. We can do it as a seafood lovers experience. I took a couple to Brixham a few weeks ago for a charity auction prize that we'd done at Cyrus's, actually, in aid of the Young Fishermen's Network, and this couple won a morning's visit on Brixham Market with me, and it's great because we sat in Rockfish after and had a lovely lunch, and we get to talk about things from a different angle as compared to the chefs and the students. But then getting food writers or journalists down there, it's another angle. You're talking from another standpoint. And so I think one of the best ones though I had was earlier this year when I took CJ Jackson down to Newlyn, and she was writing her new book, which because you had her on the other week,
Yeah,
the Great British Seafood Revival, which very kindly she's included a couple of bits about me in, and
yeah.
she'd never been to Newlyn, and one of the fish that she was focusing on was megrim, and she said, could we, if I come down there with you, can we see some megrim? And I said, I've got just the person. So we combined it. We combined that visit, which was a bit of a pilot for Key Connections, really. And I took CJ and her photographer Steve Lee down there. We had a couple of days in Newland, and we met Dave Stevens, who at that time was landing with Crystal Sea, and he took us aboard, and so she saw the megrims being landed, and that was again another angle, but a much more in-depth look, because obviously what CJ doesn't know about seafood isn't worth knowing. But
Yeah.
she'd not seen that, that angle, that sort of landing, straight onto the quayside and then onto the market and grading and everything else. She hadn't seen that side of it, and so that really for her sort of joined all the dots up, and I was delighted to be able to do that with her.
She's such a great character.
Oh, she is. Yeah. Again, she's just another really good friend, and we've done a lot of
Yeah.
demonstrations. We were up in Tarbert earlier in the year together,
Oh, yeah.
at the Tarbert Seafood Festival and on Loch Fyne, and we had an amazing couple of days. I mean, it rained non-stop. Well, it does up there, doesn't it? But
You
we
met
had.
you met Kenny, didn't you?
Yes, yeah, Kenny. Well, I knew Kenny anyway, and I was
Okay.
very,
Yeah.
very, very keen to get Kenny on along to talk about a bit of the history of the Clyde and of fishing for herring and Loch Fyne, and yeah, Kenny's one of those guys you can talk, a bit like you, Jim. You can talk to all day about the industry.
No, Kenny, yes, he is. He's a fascinating guy, and he goes back. And the good thing about people like, well, yourself as well, Mike and Kenny, that your type of people, it's not just talking about it; it's something you've got a genuine interest in. So that's how you talk better when you actually have a genuine interest yourself.
I think yes, absolutely. Your knowledge is one thing, but it's the passion that comes with that, or the passion for the industry is another. And I wouldn't do anything else now. This is me now for the rest of my days. But as I said before, you are always learning, and it's speaking to people like Kenny, and Jimmy and Peter and all the other fishermen that I deal with. It's speaking to them on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and absorbing their passion as well, which makes that whole storytelling thing so much easier and so much more colourful as well.
Yeah,
There are elements, like the little personal stories, like with Jimmy and that, little anecdotes which they come out with, and you just drop them in, and there's yeah, I mean there are examples I could quote, from the last 10 years, which have really helped me put the hook in people, and they sort of sit up and wide-eyed moments. You'll come out with a fact, or a statistic or something a fisherman has told you, which is not just anecdotal, but it's straight from the coalface of the industry. And they go, well, how could that happen? Or how do you know that? And you say, well, this is because it's the way it is, you know. And that's what you don't
yeah.
get to hear. That's what you don't get to appreciate in the media or on social media, and that's why there is this sort of body of misinformation out there, which we're continually trying to cut through.
Indeed. Could you walk us through the journey of a species you know well, highlighting the parts of the chain that you think deserve more appreciation?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, obviously, when it comes to British seafood, I promote and sort of in an ambassadorial way, if you like, for every species that I come into contact with. But there are some species which I really think deserve a little bit more airtime, and you probably know what I'm going to say, but it's a pet subject of mine, and we've got plenty off the east coast at the moment. And that's herring. I really do think that herring could play a much, much greater part in our diet nationally than it does. And it's got everything, every single box that you wish for in terms of nutrition, flavor, seasonality, traceability, abundance, management, and everything. Herring ticks that box. Even to the extent that so many of our communities were founded on its production. And in fact, while I was just waiting for you to come onto the podcast today, I was looking at a video from one of our local fishermen up just north of Yarmouth at Caister, and he was out fishing this morning, and he'd put something on YouTube, and he said the nets have nearly sunk to the bottom. We've got 10 stone in each fleet, and you know that's an amazing, abundant local resource at this time of the year, full of roe, beautiful, beautiful longshore herring, and yet the bulk of those will probably end up going for pet food, which is just a crying shame.
Uh, Fact which fascinated me, and I'm not going to claim ownership of it. CJ told me, did you know that the first and the original fish fingers
Yeah.
was made with herring?
Absolutely, and CJ I got the same story from CJ, and it fascinated me because I never knew that when she first told me years ago. But it's quite right, and of course it was going to be herring, but then they needed a whitefish sort of to compare it to, so they tried cod, and of course cod became the favourable one, and herring dropped off the radar. So yeah, but things could be so different, couldn't they? Perhaps it's time to resurrect the herring fish finger.
Well, it would be interesting. That would be really interesting because I would say in modern way buzzwords or things like that, you could probably put it into the category of superfood.
Yeah, superfood definitely. And John Goodlad came out with a lovely term when he launched his book earlier in the year, and he said, well, he wasn't applying it just to herring, but to blue food, to seafood. He said is smart food, and I really like that term as well.
Yeah, indeed. That's our real smart way of putting it.
Well, it is. I think people generally, I think the consumer is more aware of the nutritional value of seafood. The health benefits, the omega-3, the vitamins. It's a sustainable source of protein. It's low carbon compared to a lot of agriculturally produced protein. I think that awareness is slowly growing, but I think we need to do more. We need to bang that superfood, smart food drum a little louder, because in the next 50 years we're going to have to produce more protein, more food than we've ever produced before, and it's not all going to be able to come from the land. It's got to come from the sea as well, and that's just a fact. And it's all very well, talking about protecting the oceans, and yes, that's absolutely part of it. But we can't pretend that it's a sort of ecological nirvana, especially in areas which are sustainable and well managed seafood production. It's the environment is what we've created in a lot of places, and yes, we do need management, and yes, we do need regulation, but we still got to produce that food. That we are primary food producers, just like farmers, and although it's wild, it is a managed environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You've seen regulation and enforcement in detail. Where do you think policy and practice work well for seafood quality and responsible supply?
I think policy and management work the best where the fishermen are included in the mix. I think where you've got management working from the bottom up, and you've got fishermen who are sat at the table, or able to sit at the table alongside advisors and policymakers and scientists and other civil servants and the NGOs, environmental groups. Where you've got that fisherman presence, then you're always going to get I think, a much better balance of conversation, because again, I go back to the reality of what actually happens on a day-to-day basis. Science, with the best will in the world, is often in arrears as well, Jim, and you need the fishing industry there at the table to help policymakers understand how that science differs sometimes, not always, but sometimes to what's happening actually on the grounds. And so where fishermen are included in that policy making, not only do you get better management, but you get stronger fisheries, you get stronger communities, and ultimately you get better quality.
Definitely. How would you describe the growing appetite for British seafood among consumers? Have you noticed any positive shifts in what people are now asking for?
Well, we've had this question. We've been certainly going around for a long time. We had a very interesting conference organised by the UK Seafood Federation a few weeks ago, which was all about UK seafood consumption, the way that's going. A lot of interesting stuff to come out of that. Sadly, I think the seafood consumption in the UK has remained fairly static. In some areas it's improved, some areas it's in decline, but I think generally going back to what we said earlier, the quality and the provenance. I think supply chains are much more highly invested in that sort of sustainability angle now. I think the quality and welfare of the fish we produce is getting better and better. I mean, there's a lot of improvements still to be made, but the industry itself are investing in an awful lot of that innovation and improvement. So I think as an island nation, I'd love to think that we could increase our seafood consumption, and I will do everything in my power to make that happen in my own small little way. But we do have this, export market which we're lucky to have, and we do have the international customers that we're lucky to have, and so we've got to not exploit that market, but we've got to play to it. There's no reason that we shouldn't, on the back of that, introduce our consumers to a lot of what we do export. And I think certainly in hospitality over the last 15, 20 years, they've done a fantastic job in a lot of restaurants with a lot of chefs, bringing, people like Mitch Tonks, Rick Stein. They've brought that variety of British seafood into much sharper focus in their own establishments, and given people or afforded people a lot more opportunity to try and to sample and to enjoy what we have right on our own shores.
I used to reckon when Rick Stein was doing his programs on television back in the days, I used to feel he did more for the British fishing industry than we did for ourselves.
Yeah, I think Rick Stein. It's 30 years. It was 30 years in September since his very first Taste of the Sea program came out, and I actually wrote a bit for my Substack on that particular series, because it was groundbreaking for me. Keith Floyd had obviously done quite a bit himself, but Rick Stein took it to another level. And I never forget watching the first episode, and we were sitting at home, and I think we were just expecting our first child at the time, and it was a Sunday afternoon. Watching this Taste of the Sea came on, and I remember saying to my wife, "Do you know, God, here's something a guy I can really relate to." And that's when I was in farming, so you could imagine I was still totally bought into the whole seafood thing, and I just watched intensely, as this guy went around Cornwall, sampling different species and talking to fishermen, and I thought, God, that is the way to do it, And I think that authority that Rick sort of gained and maintained is still just as relevant, 30 years on. I think that if there's one series you're going to watch about seafood, go back to Taste of the Sea, because it just pretty much says everything we're saying now.
And the great thing about him is, with some chefs, you'd have to be going around 10 London delicatessens to get the ingredients.
Yeah.
With Rex, you could guarantee you would have it all in the larder.
He'd have it there, and he's got local producers turning up on his doorstep. It's not just the fish; it's the farmers that he's engaged with, his
Yeah.
local food heroes, and it's just such a lovely model. And I love going down to Padstow and going to the seafood restaurant. And I think he's, of course, the other thing, he's been the sort of proving ground for so many other chefs. Nathan Outlaw and Roy Brett and people like that. They've all started
Yeah,
life in Rick Stein's kitchen in Padstow, and
that's
I think
right.
that's such an incredible legacy, to have.
I remember he was doing, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the book. It was certainly to do with seafood from around the British Isles. And he was up on Scrabster Fish Market, and we're standing beside each other. The auction was going on, and we're chatting away, and he leaned over to me, and he had obviously spotted a box of John Dory's. It was a cracking box of large John Dory's. And he leaned over and says to me, "Hey, Jim," he says, "what do they go for up here?" And I just was fascinated, Mike. I just thought, ah, he's a businessman. Good question. I thought
Yeah,
it was lovely. His wheels were, you could just see the wheels going around. I wonder what
yeah.
they pay for that up here.
He was thinking about his margin.
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. Well, it showed me, yes, he's a businessman, but also he's human.
He's human as well, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think, I think he's the team that he's got down there, and his sons Jack and Charlie and Ed, all coming along into in the wake behind him. I think they're all doing a cracking job.
I always thought it must have been a tough one on Jack, following the footsteps of a father like Rick.
Big boots to fill, yeah, absolutely. But then
Yeah.
Jack has got his own style, and he's got his own following, and his own thoughts. So yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's just the next generation sort of going to be making their mark on it.
Going on from that, you spend a lot of time with chefs discovering underused species. Which product gives you the most confidence about new opportunities for the industry and for menus?
Um, Over the years that I've been doing this, I mean, there's been one product which I've always tried to promote and get onto British menus, and we've done it with degrees of success, and that's langoustine. And when I was running a project for the Shellfish Association back in 2018, I think I might have told you this before, Jim, and I know we've spoken about the prawn trawlers coming down to the Celtic Sea to fish off the sillies on Jones's Bank in the summer months. There's langoustines that exist down there, which are slightly different in colour and texture and different market, but those boats are going down there and trawling for them, and a lot of them are being frozen at sea. And I was down in
Mm-hmm.
Newlyn and just saw these guys landing langoustines onto the quay there, and I just thought, where are these? These aren't going onto the market. Where are they going? And this is years ago now. And then got chatting to the skipper, who's Terry Jack, on the Nereus,
Oh,
and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and Terry was saying, yeah, these are all going back up to Peterhead in the lorry, and they're going into the coal store at Luna, and then they'll go off to Spain. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. We've got langoustines from Cornish waters being landed on the Cornish quay. They're not touching Cornish soil, and they're going up to Scotland and then on to Spain. These should be going on menus locally and in restaurants, and people should have access to them. So that's when I started my first sort of foray into to getting them into to people like Jack Stein and Mitch Tonks
Mm-hmm.
and Cyrus. Cyrus had them on the menu, and it was.
Okay.
But of course, you have to compete. You have to compete against imported, Vanamite prawns or tiger prawns, and it's a difficult sell. It's more difficult than you think. It's not a case of saying to people, well, this is Cornish scampi. You're selling them as a langoustine, as an alternative to a king or tiger prawn, and of course the price point is slightly different. But then we come back to what we said earlier. People are happy to go and eat them on holiday, but then when they see them on the menu in the UK, it's slightly different. So to
Yeah,
answer your
but
question, Jim, yeah, langoustines. I've really always, I do find they're a great product, and I love selling them in the
uh,
shop.
going on from that, I feel that, yeah, they are, it's a competitive market, but up in Scotland here, we've got Bannerman Seafood. Now, they produce scampi, and you could absolutely 100% guarantee if you have a pack of Bannerman scampi, it's caught in the northwest of Scotland.
Scotland, fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And they've survived a long time.
that's just the
But
way it should be. And I think you have got scampi markets, and they obviously are the breaded tails, aren't they, or the glazed tails, and
yeah,
that is a market which is almost uniquely British, I suppose. And you've got Whitby scampi, and several people who are producing that, and Jimmy, doing his Amity scampi, and that is definitely a market. But for me, actually getting the whole langoustine, either trawled or creel caught, onto menus is quite special.
definitely. You've worked in ports around the UK. What traditional skills or local knowledge do you see being successfully passed on to the next generation?
That's a really interesting one, isn't it? I think, I mean, ports vary in extensively around the UK, and they vary in terms of who has access to them. There's a lot of health and safety about now, so I think that's where my key connections visits are important, because they give people access to a part of the harbour they might not normally get to. And I think the trouble is, over the years, it's been a case of a lot of youngsters who perhaps 30, 40, 50 years ago would have, been down at the harbour helping fishermen wash boxes, picking up some of those skills as boys or apprentices, or just, before going to sea. A lot of that doesn't exist anymore. So you don't have the opportunities for youngsters to actually pick up a passion for going to sea or being involved in the seafood industry. Having said that, there are a huge amount of skills which are necessary within that industry, which youngsters should be made aware of, and that's where you've got people like the Young Fishermen's Network down in Newlyn, as part of the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation, who are doing an incredible job in really reaching out to youngsters, and saying, look, there's a career here in the fishing industry. It might not be at sea, but it could be as in processing. There are so many skills you can learn, and trades that you can work on. And so I think that's really encouraging. I think that despite some areas of the country, East Anglia included, where there's very, very minimal uptake of youngsters coming into the industry, there are areas, some hotspots, if you like, in places like Newlyn and Brixham and along the southwest there, where fishermen and organisations are being very proactive in ensuring that the message gets out there to schools and colleges and universities, and say, yeah, that we're here. It's a great industry to be involved in, and there's some great careers.
Great message. How can restaurants and the wider hospitality sector play a more positive role in supporting these coastal communities?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. So I think restaurants and Wright Brothers are a classic example in London. I've done quite a bit of work with Wright Brothers, and they are totally invested. They've got the whole supply chain, so they are buying off the market in Brixham, and they've got their own chefs in their own restaurants. So you've got a wonderful chain of custody there, and you've got this incredible support for the community down in Brixham from that particular company in London, and they've got their wholesale arm at Billingsgate, obviously. So they're doing great things with the community. I mean, they're doing the project with their redundant oyster shells, where they're going around collecting the used oyster shells from their restaurants and other restaurants who they supply, and they're taking those over to Colchester, where they're getting used as a culch for other oyster reefs. It's a great way of recycling those shells, which would normally just go into food waste. And you've got other restaurants doing the same in their own way. You've got Mitch Tonks, who's got his own fishing boat, down in Rockfish in Brixham. So I think some of these restaurants are really sort of taking a lead now, and they're identifying their customers with those fishing communities. They've completed that sort of net to plate process, that net to plate cycle. and all the knowledge which transfers along the way. So for me, that's the ultimate connection, really, isn't it? You're buying the fish off your own boat and you're selling it in your own restaurant, albeit hundreds of miles apart. And if you can continue doing that and giving people more of an experience along the way, then I think there's a lot to be said for it.
That's good. Do you mean, or do you feel that the people at sea and the people in the kitchen are strengthening
What, in terms of their knowledge?
connection?
Oh, the connections, yeah, definitely. And I think the more we can do that, the better. I mean, it's I particularly like it when I talk to a chef and he mentions a port or a harbour that perhaps he hasn't been to, but he knows that the fish comes from there. So already there's a connection, because he's fully aware of where his fish is coming from, even if it's not coming direct. So with that in mind, he's going to ask the next question: which boat was it? And then we need to prompt him to say, what gear type was it? Which sea area did it come from? Who caught it? Why it was caught? Where it was caught? How it was caught? Those are the fundamental questions that I think they need to ask.
Do you not feel that gives a trust, Mike? I always felt myself with the restaurant, it gave a trust, because if people were going to eat something and they could see at a glance on the menu exactly who it came from, who caught it, where it was caught, and that it gave people a comfort and a trust that they could eat it.
Yeah, because that connection has been made for them, hasn't it?
Yeah.
They in a way that they can sit down there and they're going to look at a menu and you've got a choice of species there, and one of those species is it's seasonal and the boat name and the skipper name is there. That connection has been made for them, and of course they're going to want to know why, aren't they? Why is that particular boat sitting on the menu there? What has made them buy fish from that particular port at this particular time of year? Well, perhaps they don't think that. I don't know, but it's something that we can. It's more information. It's another layer of information, isn't it? I mean, if you go and if you're having grass-fed beef or free-range chicken, it's so much nicer to know the farm that it was produced on, how it was produced, what sort of life it had, the welfare involved, and why shouldn't the same exist for seafood?
I'm sure you've experienced it yourself with this and the different things you've been involved with, but one of the things I always felt, yes, I'm involved in the industry and I have been at a lot of different sectors, but just latterly in the restaurant, the number of customers, just general public coming in, and what Jimmy Buchan and the programme Trawlerman did for the fishing industry, a lot of people are not aware of it. It's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need another Trawlerman type series. I mean, what Jeremy Clarkson has done for agriculture with Clarkson's Farm has catapulted people's knowledge of the challenges and the day-to-day trials of tribulations of food production. That's catapulted their knowledge right to the fore and has got them asking more questions, and has actually placed a certain element of trust and respect back into the farming community. And I think we need exactly the same thing to happen for the fishing community, because there's no doubt about it. That Trawlerman series, when it came out in 2004 or whenever it was, that was groundbreaking. That really did. And that's what inspired me. That's what inspired me to leave my agricultural career behind, because I watched that program and I thought, this is incredible. I've got to go to Peterhead and I've got to find out more about what these guys do. And that's what originally put me in contact with Jimmy, because I'd seen him on Trawlerman.
Yeah, and that's a good example you give there. Who was it you mentioned?
Jeremy Clarkson.
Jeremy Clarkson. It's incredible how many fishermen have actually said to me, I wish Jeremy Clarkson owned a fishing boat.
There, by the grace of God, go I. And I just honestly, I think that's exactly what needs to happen. It should be Clarkson's trawler, shouldn't it? It's I think there's so much that can be gleaned from a proper fly on the wall document, and of course it's got to be entertaining. And Trawlerman was entertaining. You'd got these incredible characters, which you have all around the UK. It doesn't have to be in Peterhead. It could be anywhere. But a snapshot of what's going on, on the day-to-day lives of the fishing industry at the coalface of food production or seafood production. And that's what Jeremy Clarkson has done really, really well. Yeah, I mean, I know he's got a lot of
Definitely.
legacy with him, but it's he's
Yeah.
he's done it in a very, very entertaining and engaging way.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Looking ahead, what development gives you confidence that working harbours will continue to thrive in the decades to come?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure on harbours. Wherever you go in the UK, it's the spatial competition of the marine environment which is driving that. Whether it's offshore energy, whether it's marinas, private yacht usage, whether it's dredging for ports, there's a lot of pressure and space on harbours and on fishing communities. But these fishing communities have been around a long time. They underpin the sustainability of these communities. And I think, quite rightly, a lot of the companies now which are heavily invested in ports for reasons, for activities other than fishing, I think they are realizing that, that the heritage and the culture and the socio-economics that go and accompany a fishing community and the fishing industry are worth protecting, and I don't think it's all in all cases that the fishing is getting edged out. I mean, yes, in some cases that's definitely happened, but I think there's a growing realization that fishing has such an important part to play in community life, and for things like food tourism, which let's face it, in some parts of the country, especially in the southwest, is vitally important for the local economy. That is underpinned by the fishing industry. So I think ports will continue to develop, but not necessarily at the expense of fishing, because I think there is enough interest there locally, and enough stakeholders and local people invested in that community to make sure it doesn't happen.
Good, very good. If there's one part of the seafood story in the UK that deserves to be celebrated more widely, what would you highlight?
Gosh, one aspect of the seafood industry. That's a really difficult question, because it's there are so many elements of the industry which do deserve celebration and recognition. I'd have to give that a lot of serious thought. I think one thing which is apparent, and I would like to just mention an organisation which I'm a trustee of, called Fishing into the Future. And Fishing into the Future is a charity which is run by fishermen for fishermen. The board exists of fishermen, not all fishermen, but a majority. And Fishing into the Future is invested heavily in helping the industry make its own connections with government, with science, with education, with legislation, with enforcement, with all the different elements. And it brings fishermen into an arena that they are not used to, with something called an FREP, which is a fisheries education outreach program. We
Yeah,
run these around the country, and it's inspiring. It is absolutely inspiring, because you get fishermen in a room out of their environment, and able to suddenly communicate on a level with chief scientists, chief policymakers, civil servants. Do you know what I mean? And almost the Chatham House rules. You're there to do a job, and to have to have different presentations, and to listen about not just the concerns of the industry, but the concerns of the authorities and the regulators as well. And I would love to see that continue, and improve, because I think that's at the heart of what we need to try and achieve in the fishing industry is recognition for what we do, and being able to forge our own connections within the wider industry, which has got to make for a stronger sector. And so, yeah, it's probably not the answer you wanted, but I think it just deserves some mention, because I think it's an incredibly powerful platform.
I think that's wonderful. It was what was in your mind. I was wanting, and you said it, and I couldn't agree with you more. I was at an FREP in the Clyde last
Oh
year,
yes, yeah, great.
and I just thought this is absolutely amazing. You had in the room, we had people from Marine Scotland, we had fishermen, we had people from, you mentioned her earlier, Linda. She was with
Yeah,
M&S at the time.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
you had supermarkets, you had fishermen, you had Marine Directorate, the authorities,
you
all aspects, it round the room talking. I thought it was
exactly.
brilliant. I
It's
thought it
great,
was
isn't it?
brilliant.
And it's a wonderful environment to have those conversations in. But of course, the underlying message is that the most important people in the room are the fishermen.
Yeah.
They are the ones in the middle. Everybody else is around the outside and have been invited in. And I think that is so important because it means that the fishermen have much more of a voice, in their own right.
And one of the things I like about that voice, Mike, is you don't find yourself after you hear it thinking, I wonder what he meant.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, 100%.
You know exactly what he's
I
telling
I
you.
know, I
And
know.
and they don't, at the FREP there, when they had the Marine Scotland guy or Marine Directorate on the stage, there was no holding back. It
There is
was
no holding back. No, and that's the arena that we want to create. That's exactly. Nothing's off limits, and that's exactly the place to discuss the things that you perhaps couldn't discuss on the quayside.
definitely very healthy. Just talk. It's good. That's the old BT. I think was a great term used. The old BT advert about the telephone. It's
Oh yeah,
good to
let's.
talk.
It's good to
It's
talk.
good to talk.
It is
What's
absolutely, and
what's truer than that?
nothing truer than that. And also to talk about seafood, which is what we've done today, which is I
Definitely.
absolutely love it.
Well, that's a good point then, because it takes me to the next thing I was wanting to ask you, and you could elaborate on it. Just say you're on the local fish market, fish has been landed, and you have your choice for your evening meal. What would that choice be to you?
Ooh, does that have to be local here or local to the UK? Can I go? Can I go
Just
anywhere?
you can go anywhere.
Well, I'll tell you what I had, which I really really enjoy. I've had it twice actually this year. Once in Brixham and once in Newlyn. And for me, it's probably one of the finest flavoured fish that I ever used to sell on the slab, and I'd tell people that. And you mentioned it earlier on with Rick Stein in Scrabster, and that's John Dory. And if I was going to have one fish right now, I think I'd have a lovely pan fried, crispy skin side fillet of John Dory with a little bit of brown butter and possibly a scattering of brown shrimps on it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful fish.
It's a cracking fish, yeah. I mean, certainly one of my absolute favourites, and had two John Dory this year, as I said, one in Brixham and one in Newlyn, both cooked on the bone over a grill, and yeah, there's nothing finer than that.
Yeah, a lot of people when we had the restaurant would ask me if I was going round the tables, what's your favourite seafood? And I used to feel quite guilty, and I would say, well, I feel if I was to pick one, I would be doing a disservice to the others.
Yeah, and that's how you feel, isn't it? I think. And that's the beauty of eating seasonally, isn't it, Jim? Because it limits the number of species that you can have. You have a seasonal or a market special, and that's, to be honest, that's how I like to order fish. If there's a specials board there, that's the way I'm going to go and order.
Like, where can our listeners follow you online?
Right, so we've got Instagram, which is at A Passion for Seafood. You can also go to our website and you can read all about me there, which is apassionforseafood.com. But I've also recently started writing again on Substack. There's a free subscription or a paid subscription on there costs if you want to pay for a little bit of extra content, and the one or two sort of deep dives into the fishing industry. That's going to cost you £5 a month, or you can have a free subscription as well, and that's Substack, a passion for seafood at substack.com.
Yeah, have you a website for the key connections or?
Yeah, there's a key connections tab on the A Passion for Seafood website.
Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, I quite often post stuff about key connections on LinkedIn. If we've done a visit, then I'll post about it on there. But if anybody wants to get in contact for a visit, for a company or for a group, or for anybody really, you want a bespoke visit to either Brixham, Peterhead, or Newlyn, or anywhere else, we have contacts all around the UK. Do get in touch, and I'd be happy to sort of put a quote together for you.
Excellent. Well, I think on that we could maybe fold up, Mike, and I'd certainly thank you. And as the old saying, keep doing what you're doing. It's a great job.
Well, it's something I love doing, Jim, and it's great to be back on Seafood Matters, and thank you very much for having me.